Greetings, everyone. Welcome back from winter break. I hope everyone is feeling replenished and refreshed and ready for the start of spring semester on Friday. We're kicking off the new semester with two wonderful professors who have a deep passion for their work at USC and who found very different ways to innovate in the online environment. Emily Nix is an assistant professor of finance and business economics at the Marshall School. And Jack Feinberg is a professor of physics, astronomy, and electrical engineering at Dornsife College. Thank you both for joining me for my latest We Are SC interviews. Emily, many of you may know, became a viral sensation over the summer when she posted a video of her do-it-yourself light board that she built to help transition the classroom experience from the physical to the virtual world. More than 65,000 people have watched her initial video. And this was just one of the ways that she really made a very large lecture class become much more intimate online. Jack cracked the code on teaching labs during the COVID pandemic because he was able to give his physics lab students a taste of what it's like to be a scientist while still at home. He spent last summer devising experiments and he spread them out throughout the Feinberg home. I wish I could have seen that. He then organized kits full of equipment and he shipped the kits to 1,000 students around the world. He realized that by doing simulations, you would never be able to give the same experience. It would not compare to actually building something from scratch. I'm so delighted to have both of them with me today to talk about some of the things they learned last semester and what they're excited about for in the coming year. And I want to also talk a bit about their research because what I've learned is a very special part of the USC experience is that we have these incredible, creative, innovative faculty who do all this discovery-based work and they bring that same passion and innovation to their lives in the classroom, in the lab, and as teachers. And that's when the real magic takes place. So I'm going to start by asking you both to tell us a little bit about yourselves, where you grew up, maybe, how'd you get to USC, pick your area of study, and did you always know that you actually wanted to teach? So why don't I start with Emily?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. We're so excited to have the students back on the campus, or virtually to start at least. And so I'm originally from New Orleans, Louisiana. So my students tease me, I'll drop a y'all here and there. I did my PhD at Yale. And after I graduated, I had a number of offers at different great academic institutions and industry. And in policy, and I was just really drawn to USC. It's a combination of a place where you have cutting edge research, but you also have some of the best students in the world. And I'm just so excited about my research and that I think bleeds into the classroom. And then since I'm excited to get my students excited about economics, because the reason I was first drawn to economics is that it gives you these amazing tools to understand the world around you a little better and to address these big questions we're facing, like how do you address poverty? How do you address inequality? How do you deal with discrimination? And so that's what drew me to the subject, and that's what that excitement is what I try to convey to my students.
Emily, when you were starting, one more question for you. Did you actually think as an undergraduate that a research and a teaching career was where you'd go? Or when did that start really becoming your goal?
So I think I got into research because I wanted to make an impact on the world. And I think there's two ways that being a professor at USC allows me to make that impact. One is through my research. And so, having research covered in newspapers and reaching out to policymakers. So recently a paper of mine was sent to a presidential candidate's team, one of the people who's running back in the day. But the other way we make impact is through teaching our students, because our students, or I believe many of my students, are going to go on to be the leaders of this country, the leaders in the world, whether it be in politics or in business, me being at the business school. And so it's so inspiring to be able to be part of their learning journey and part of helping them better understand the world, which hopefully will help them have the sort of impact they want to have when they graduate.
That's fabulous. Really love that. Jack, can you tell us a bit more about you and your experience, how you got here and all that sort of stuff that led you to be sitting here today?
Yeah, sure. Well, I grew up in the suburbs of New York City, and then I came out to California to go to graduate school at UC Berkeley. I worked hard to get rid of my New York accent, which I think I've done a good job on. And after I got my PhD at Berkeley, there was a postdoc job advertised at USC with actually a famous physicist named Robert Hellworth. And I applied and I got the job. So I came down to USC and I was a postdoc for a few years. And then I joined the physics faculty and I've been here ever since. And I started my own research laboratory and had my own graduate students, and it's been great. It's been really great. You asked, did you always want to teach? Yeah, I think so. I like teaching. I remember when I was in elementary school, I became a ham radio operator, and for that, you have to learn Morse code to pass the test to be able to get a ham radio license. And one of my friends was also in elementary school with me, and I taught him Morse code, and I used to give him tests to see if he learned it right, which I thought was pretty obnoxious now that I think about it. But I guess I always liked the teaching part. But listening to Emily, I was thinking how different it was for me. I always just tried to do whatever I wanted to do at the time. I didn't think where I was going to go and what it would lead to. I just liked doing physics and I liked working in the lab, and things just worked out. It was just lucky for me, I think. And combining the teaching and research has been basically the best life I could have thought of for myself.
I think that means a lot. When I think about our students, they often see us in these positions and somehow they think that just happened, or we had a very direct thought about how to get there. And I think it's really wonderful when the reality is that's not really how it works, but following your passion, loving what you do. I think those are, they're just so telling. So we're going to have a chance to talk with you more, both about that in the rest of the interview. When we went online in March, I think this is a really big moment too. You were busy doing your research, your teaching, you were doing things in a different way. And what was it? USC basically had to go 100% online in 5 days. And so that meant all of you had to completely rethink what you were doing and how are you going to keep that connection to your students and so on. You clearly figured out how to do it beautifully well, both of you. And you must have spent a lot of time thinking about how to take the best of the classroom experience and make it resonate for remote teaching. So I'd love that you each would take a little time talking about how you thought about that, capturing that moment, and what you were really trying to capture. So why don't I'm going to start with Emily again. How did you start thinking about it? Because pretty quickly, you're already making changes.
Yeah, and so I love being in the classroom. And so, you're going to miss some parts of that. But the trick, I think, for me was I actually literally looked at videos of myself teaching because I had some recordings and I studied it. And I thought, what is it that students are connecting with? What is it that I think makes me as effective as I can be in the classroom? And there's always room for improvement, but what makes me effective? And so, and then I focused on those things. So one thing is I do a lot of board work. So I do a lot of work writing on the board, and I needed to replicate that. And then we do small group problem solving, and I needed to be able to replicate that. And so I focused on each of these individual elements that I think together make the magic of a good classroom experience, and kind of isolated each of those. How can you translate that online?
Wow, that's wonderful. I love hearing that. Jack, I'm a scientist, and I think I would have immediately thought, oh no, I'm going to lose all my hands-on learning. I think that would have been just like a dagger. Like, what am I going to do? And I think that's a lot of people. The first question they ask me is about, what about the scientists? So I don't know how you decided to not just give up on that, but instead turned around and designed and delivered 1,000 experiments to students around the world. So can you tell us a bit about that process? And maybe you'll be able to show us an example of what you sent to students.
Yeah, sure. Well, it was really two steps because, as you said, we were in the middle of the semester. I was teaching a class of 11 students. They were all senior physics majors, and it was an experimental lab class. So, that was it. We couldn't come into the lab anymore. So for the first few weeks, I didn't quite know what to do, and I would just give them problems in theory, quantum mechanics, and stuff like that. But it wasn't the same. And the key was when I was in Berkeley, there was a nutty physics professor there named Frank Crawford, who was a brilliant guy. And he wrote a book on optics. And he included with the optics book in the back a little kit of just small components that you could use to do optics experiments. And in his book, he would have in each chapter at the end possible experiments that students could do. And I was always amazed by that book. And that's what I turned to in that semester. I said, I can do what Crawford did. And I looked at the components that he had gathered and I added to them and I sent them to my 11 students. And I said, I want you guys to do optics experiments. Here's the kind of things I want you to do. Here's Crawford's book. I sent them each the book. And we'll meet every week and we'll talk about the experiments you're doing, what results you have, et cetera. And so it was, it wasn't great, but it was certainly better than nothing. And then we all thought that COVID would be over by the end of the summer and then USC would go back to normal. And then by the middle of the summer, it was very clear that wasn't going to happen. And I was part of a lab committee meeting to try to figure out what we're going to do. And some people wanted to do virtual experiments where, you get to watch videos of people doing experiments. But to me, it's like the difference between watching someone eat food and eating food, it's like, so I volunteered to do this on a much larger scale and to send kits to all the students in all the different classes. We'd have to come up with different kits for the different classes. And I'd have to first come up with all the experiments because in order to know what parts to buy, you have to know what the experiments are. So that was the hardest part, was coming up with 9 experiments for 5 classes. It's 45 experiments in 2 weeks, 3 weeks time, because we didn't have a long lead time. We're going to buy all this stuff and assemble it and ship it. And it was just, we had to do it very quickly.
Can you show us one of an example of what you said to the students, sent to them?
Yeah, sure.
Let's see what that looks like in there.
Let's see if I can get this on the camera. Can you guys see this at all?
Oh, yeah. Wow. What an amazing assembly. Are those tuning forks?
They are tuning forks. These kits, the 11 kits I put together myself. There's no way I could do 1,000. It would be overwhelming. So I had a grad student 20 years ago who went into the business of making scientific kits. And I called him up and he has a company called Zump. And he agreed to do this with me. And that's a Zump kit that you're looking at right there. These are parts that we picked out, we ordered, we got them and assembled them. Oh yeah, you asked about these tuning forks.
Yeah.
Tuning forks. We sent these to every student, a pair of tuning forks. You want to see an experiment?
Oh, yes, we do.
Okay, so I'm going to do an experiment for you. This is to show you the beating. It's called beating between 2 sounds that are very similar, but not quite. So here's one. I'm going to lock it on my knee. Can you hear that at all?
Yes.
You know what? I'm going to look at my microphone here. Let's do it again. All right, so you can hear that one. And here's another one. Here's another tuning fork. And in this one, I have put some tape on the edges. And what it does is it slows down the vibrations, so it's not quite as fast. And the frequency is a little bit different. But I don't think you can hear that. If I whack it, it sounds pretty much the same, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So now watch. I'm going to do them both at the same time. And if we're lucky, we'll hear the effect, which is a sort of a vibrato effect, a beating of the 2 notes with each other. Let's try that again.
Oh yeah, I could hear it at the end. I definitely.
I touched them together. It's no good.
Yep. Yep.
Can you hear it? Goes wow, 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 like
Yes.
that?
Yes. Yeah.
So it's a simple experiment, but it actually lets the students compute what the difference is in frequency of those two tuning forks. And I tell the students that, singers use that same effect, because if two singers are singing slightly off from each other, it'll beat. You'll hear the vibrato, with an inadvertent vibrato, and so they adjust their pitch until that goes away.
And if students had trouble, how did you were you able to have TAs? I mean, how did you interact with them if they were finding it hard to do it? You couldn't walk around the lab and talk to them over their shoulder like you might do in a normal term.
Yeah, if they had trouble, I was always online with them. Now, I'm talking more about when I was doing it with 11 students. With 1,000 students, I couldn't go online with them, not with 1,000 of them. Although some of them, even though they weren't my students, in other words, I wasn't teaching the class, someone else was teaching the class, because my name was associated with the lab kits, they would email me and they'd say, I can't get this thing to work. And so I'd say, fine, pick a time and I'll meet with you. And we did. And we'd spend an hour or two online, we get the thing to work, and they were happy and I was happy, I enjoyed it. It's COVID, what else are you going to do, right? You're stuck at home. So it was fun.
That's wonderful. I think it's fabulous. And for those students, what a difference that makes to do that. And for us as people who love to teach, there really isn't anything better than having that chance to have that one-on-one interaction. Emily, you sort of reinvented the big lecture class using technology. That was really what you were trying to do. Can you tell us a little bit more about your light board? Because it seems so simple, but it's compelling. I have to tell you, I just want to have one. I love what it looks like and what it feels like. And then help us understand how that really helped students engage in the class.
Yeah, so I think the problem is it can be very unengaging if you're just staring at a PowerPoint slides. And so you want to somehow replicate that. I'm looking at you, I'm writing on the board, we're interacting together. And so I did a lot of Googling, because that's, where you go first to solve your problems. And so I found this idea of a light board, but the professional ones were like $10,000. And it was a little out of my price range. So then I'm pretty handy myself. So I figured, this doesn't seem that hard. So why don't I just make one myself? And so first I made a tiny prototype, and then it blew up. I posted a little thing on Twitter. People were so excited about it. So I said, clearly this is working. And so then I made this huge version, which you can see now. And basically all it is, it's really simple. It's a piece of plexiglass in front of me. And you get the lighting right. So I basically did a home studio. If you get the lighting right and you do LED lights around the side, you can then write, and it just looks like it's glowing in front of you. And so the first time I did it in class, I literally had multiple students saying, this is magic. How is she doing this? Was she writing in thin air? And so it was just, and then I also learned this new software called OBS, which made it look much more polished, so I could flip back and forth between me writing and the slides. And I think it just made it feel much more intimate, or at least that's what the students said. At the heart of it, I think this comes through in what Jack's described me as well. We love our subjects. And at the heart of it, I think it's really about letting that shine. So letting the fact that I love economics and I want my students to be excited about that too, but you have to get over this hurdle of making it accessible in this online environment. But once you do that, how fun is it to learn about, monopoly power and how that applies to the lawsuit that came up against Google while I was teaching, and I can bring that in, and then we can draw out the monopoly power problem and write it out on the board together. And so I think it's just letting that come through. We have great students. We as professors, we love our subjects, and we want you to love it as much as we do. And it's just about coming up with some small things that I think really help you kind of connect, and even when it's online.
Do you think you're going to continue to use the light board in some way? It's a pretty cool thing.
Yeah, so actually, when I think about it, the light board is actually better than my traditional board. So I'm the tri professor. I have a huge classroom because I'm teaching a pretty big lecture. So I'll fill out 7 whiteboards, and my students will say to anybody else, we love that she filled out all 7 whiteboards. But it's actually worse because you're not facing the students when you're writing on a whiteboard. So the light board is actually, if anything, an improvement on the in-class experience because I can actually be looking at them, and I have when I teach online, I have their pictures up on the side. And so then I'll be looking at them and writing, and they're all talking in the chat with each other and with me and asking questions. And it just felt way more intimate. I came in with a lot of trepidation, and it felt so intimate, and I really got to know my students, and they were so excited about the material. I mean, I had one student say, I never thought I would like economics. And then I came to your class, and actually it turns out I do maybe like it. And that's the highest praise, you know, you really thought you were going to hate it. And then I converted you, and that's what you love.
That's fabulous. I know we were talking about this earlier. And I know, Jack, I know that you were saying how, you know, just this not having that in-person experience is really difficult, but you managed to make it something that could connect even across, you know, different kinds of boundaries. What do you think about what you've learned in this? Are there parts of this experience or the way students were able to interact that you actually think have taught you something about your own teaching, or things that we can say to students who have felt discouraged about learning in this new environment? You know, how do you see that?
Yeah, it's a good question. One thought is that with Zoom, you really can do a one-on-one with a student. You can go into the breakout room, and they can ask you a question, you can answer it and help them, and they don't have to embarrass themselves in front of their fellow students. And I found that was definitely true, that they'd be more forthcoming and more willing to admit they didn't understand something and wanted help. And that doesn't happen when you're teaching a big class, because students don't want to be embarrassed. But I'm definitely going to get one of these light boards that Emily made, because she's absolutely right. The ability to face your students is great, because the eye contact is what it's all about. So I think it's a great invention she has.
I think, like all of you too, I've found myself that I've had more intimate conversations with students over Zoom. You know, coming in and visiting the president can feel very intimidating for students. And yet
it's intimidating for professors too.
Yes. But, so being able to have that Zoom does, it has that capacity to maybe make things less intimidating. I think maybe one of you was sharing with me the idea that for some students, even some of the best students are not the ones that will talk. How do you think they used, you said you thought the chat and the breakout rooms were good. And do you think, there might be things we can learn in the future terms that can have us really be able to use that? Because that's a pretty cool addition, especially in a large class where they may not get that sense of intimate connection normally.
Yeah, so I think like the semester before we went on to Zoom, I remember distinctly, I had this student, she was brilliant. She aced every single test. She aced the midterm. She aced everything. She was really, really understood the material at a deep level. And when I walked around, when we do like small group problems, she always knew what she was doing. And the other students could so benefit from her knowledge, but she would never raise her hand. And I totally get it. I teach an 80-person class. It's really intimidating to raise your hand in front of 80 people, even if you know the answer, not to mention if you might not know the answer. And so I think on the one hand, I do cold call, because I do think that's an important skill to learn. If you're going to be a leader, you have to learn to speak up. But at the same time, I want to bring to the in-person experience, when we're not online anymore, that ability to kind of interact in different ways. Because I think not everyone really enjoys, even if it's a good skill to have, not everyone enjoys speaking in front of 80 people. And so having like the chat I would literally have, I think every student multiple times was writing in the chat. I would have hundreds and hundreds of comments in the chat at the end of each class. And you just don't get that level of participation in person in a lecture. And that was incredible. I've never had such participation. It was incredible to see. The students really stepped up. They want to learn, is my view. And they're excited about learning when they're given the opportunity to do it in a nice environment.
That is fabulous. Jack, how about you? Very different kinds of environments that you work in. And I think we're all wondering, are students going to emerge from all this with a new set of skills? Have they actually learned something? And I just wonder what your experience, what do you think? Do you expect to have a slightly different kind of class in the future? Or how do you think this is going to play out?
Well, I guess it depends on the class. If I'm teaching experimental lab classes, there's nothing that can replace being right there with the students and helping them when things don't work. And also the good thing about the being in person is the students, it's easier for them to help each other. They can just turn around and help the person behind them. So I must confess that I'm going to be glad when this is all over and we can get back to the old-fashioned way for most of it. I'm sure there are some things that will carry over, the benefits, but I am looking forward to the human contact of it again.
I think we all are. Probably every single one of us is a person who, if you have a day that's not going quite right, getting to bump into a student and talk to them is the thing that turns that day around.
Yeah,
and so
right.
I think that will be wonderful for all of us. You have any funny stories that happened to you in Zoom? Do you have any cameos from a pet or a family member? I've had a lot of funny Zooms when people popped in. Did either of you have funny experiences?
Zoom related?
Yeah, well, in this last term, you can share any.
No, I don't have any funny Zoom. I was always fully dressed and all that business. So
That's good.
yeah, no, I
My
didn't
dog did inevitably, whenever office hours started, that was the time to bark, like for sure. So my students got to know my dog, at least during office hours, relatively well.
I think everybody, I've seen hilarious pictures where people's, cat came up into the picture and took their notes away, or someone's child standing in the background making faces and, all of that. But I'm pretty sure you would tell me that your students were pretty good natured when anything went wrong.
Oh, they applauded it. They were glad to have it happen. I did have some pet incidents, but they're fleeting and fun.
And I also had some students whose family members joined sometimes on accident during office hours, which I always feel they feel so bad, but I want them to be encouraged to know we are all in this together. So I actually find it very personalizing that, I get to know your family a little bit too. So don't feel bad if you're a student and something goes a bit awry. That happens to us all.
Oh, that's fabulous. Well, I want to talk a little bit about your research, because we know that that's a big part of both of your lives. It's part of why you have the passion for the teaching that you do. So maybe here I'll start with Jack. Can you tell us about what you're working on, even what you're working on right now? And in fact, I'm sort of interested in how the pandemic has affected even what or how you work with your colleagues.
Yeah, I've been gravitating towards the applications of optics to medicine in the last few years. So the one project I did was to use laser light to diagnose the severity of people who have sickle cell anemia. We could use the laser and shine it through a thin sheet of red blood cells. And from the resulting pattern that's on the screen, you could actually figure out what fraction of their red blood cells were sickled and what fraction were normal, and whether or not that person was pretty much about to have a trauma from the excessive sickle cell concentration. And then more recently, I've been involved in applications to cardiology. And so the one that I'm working on right now is whether or not you can predict if someone is going to go into atrial fibrillation. And also to see if someone who's been recently cardioverted from atrial fibrillation, where they give you a shock and they get your heart working again, if you can see even a few weeks later that it's not quite right. And so that's been a computer experiment where I do computer analysis of the electrocardiograms that we get from patients. And that's easy to do online because it's online. You're looking at your computer screen and writing programs. So that hasn't been a problem at all with Zoom.
Do you find it easy to work? I mean, it sounds like you're working with people in the medical center, and I don't know, you may even be working with people that live out of the country or sorts of places. Has that been something that's been very fulfilling part of your work at USC, being able to reach out and work with people in completely different disciplines?
Yes, absolutely. And USC is great with that. Ever since I came here, I've had the opportunity to collaborate with people. And it's been so easy to do. There's no bureaucratic hurdles you have to meet. If somebody has something that you're interested or they're interested in what you're doing, you just get on the phone and talk, and then the next day you meet, and bingo, you have a project going. And that's been very satisfying for me. And even people share equipment. I remember Kurt Wittick, a chemistry professor, walked into my lab one day when hadn't been here more than a year or two. And you don't have much equipment when you start. And Kurt said, "Hey, you want one of my lasers?" I said, yes, absolutely. And it was fun because 20 years later, I gave him back a different laser because I didn't need it anymore.
That's wonderful.
But you're absolutely right. And I'm working with people in the medical school now, and also another cardiologist who's out in Tucson, Arizona. That's part of the United States, I guess. So,
Except when we're playing them in a game.
Yeah,
Then they count separately.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Emily, how about you? I think you even have graduate students that live in different countries. It's very global work. Can you tell us a little bit about your research? And maybe I think you might even have just submitted another paper recently, and just a little bit about what it's like for you and what you do.
Yeah, so I think, at least in economics, increasingly academia has become very much global. So I have co-authors in Finland, I have co-authors in England, I have co-authors in the US, I have co-authors all around the world, really, at this point. And so, even before the pandemic, I was used to a lot of online calls and working together online and having our Slack channels and so on. But one thing you had asked about how the pandemic changed our research a little bit. And one thing that happened to me is I had a project that I'm very excited about that before the pandemic, which was looking at the differential impact of job loss, depending on your parents' income. And then suddenly we have the pandemic and we have a jobs cliff. And I put together a Tommy talk that I'm sure people can find online. So USC has been putting together a bunch of research talks, some out of the business school, talking about job loss. And what we know in economics is first of all, we know from the data that there's been this huge drop in jobs. And this is really, really horrifying to see. And we want these people to get jobs back, in part because it turns out that if you lose your job, there's something called an unemployment scar, which means that you're more likely to to lose your job again in the future, and your earnings stay depressed for up to 15 years in the US. And so that's really, really problematic, especially in the current context. And I already had a project start on this, where what we're trying to understand is how does this differ if your parents in the top 20% of the income distribution versus the bottom? Is there a way in which, we might think if you come from a more impoverished background, maybe you get on the job ladder, but that perch might be a little more precarious. And so what we're doing in this paper is we're studying that, and we got much more motivated after the pandemic because we're seeing it. We're in the middle of a jobs crisis. And so we need to know what's going to happen to these people so we can optimally formulate policy to address these issues. And what we see in our paper, we show in our paper is there's a huge difference in the pattern. It does actually turn out to be the case that if your parents are in the bottom 20%, even once we control for a bunch of things, you have a much more severe unemployment scar. And so we're going to have to really think carefully as a country about how do we address these long-term issues related to layoffs that we are now going to have to deal with the current economy. And so hopefully our research can help be a part of that solution.
It's really important. I love the fact that you shared that with us. And it's interesting to me, you're in the Marshall School. I mean, we have the whole university, but when I'm thinking about what each of the school is trying to do in our communities right now, so many of these issues that we have been studying are out there for us to try to be working on. And so the Marshall School itself has created a lot of clinics. It's reaching out to small business owners. So while you're researching it, they're already trying to put in practice new ways to really help people get recovery, find their way back. And even when you think about this in the schools, we're all worried about what this is doing to kids that are losing, years of teaching. I'm finding that we're doing more and more on our neighborhood academic initiative, trying to be part of the solution, even as the issues are taking place. And I think that's a lot because of the people that come and work here, the creative thinkers like the two of you, and that your belief in the work that you're doing, you want it to have real impact. And some of that is impact in lives, some of it's impact in the discoveries for health in the future. You're so creative. How do you get your own inspiration, or how do you stay motivated and fresh? Because it gets tough for faculty too. Emily, you want to start with that one?
I feel like Jack has the wisdom here compared to me,
No,
but,
no, no,
but
not at all.
but I can start. So I guess, I mean, really from my colleagues and my co-authors, and then also, the world around us has a lot of problems, but you can either just be apathetic and let it be, or you can be part of the solution. And I hope in some small way, both in terms of hopefully giving my students the knowledge they need to be part of the solution, but also through my research, hopefully being part of the solution. I think for me, like I said, you can look at the problems of the world and throw your hands up, and trust me, sometimes I want to do that. It's exhausting sometimes to try and do good in the world. But I came to research and I came to teaching because I wanted to be part of making things better and part of solving bigger problems we're facing. And I think we can do that. I think, USC has given me an amazing opportunity to be part of a community that's trying to do that. And so hopefully I can keep going. And I also, part of where I get my inspiration is I'm really thankful for the opportunity I've had at USC to be able to do this work.
It's fabulous. How about you, Jack?
I don't think I'm a very good original thinker of dreaming stuff up from scratch. I know that, if I'm confronted with a crossword puzzle, it's hopeless. It's all that white space there. I can't do it. But my wife, who's very good at crossword puzzles, she'll leave one half done. And then I love it, because then I can see, if I just get this word, then that'll make this word come out. And I think it's the same thing for me. I just like to see connections between different disciplines. So, for example, the cardiology and the laser optics, that's the kind of stuff I love to do, where I like being in between those two fields and putting them together. I don't know if that answered your question or not, but
no, it's wonderful. I think it really does. I love that. We all have such different. Do we look for the point? Are we looking at the white space, the dark space? I just think we're all different thinkers. That's fabulous to sort of hear the two of you talk about it. I think, Jack, you're on sabbatical this semester, but I know you're still going ahead and shipping your experiments to lab students. What else are you going to do? What research or other things do you have planned for a sabbatical? It's kind of an unusual time for a sabbatical as well.
Yeah, I'm going to do the cardiology thing. So I'm going to stick around probably and work with the people at the Keck Hospital Medical Center and do some cardiology projects. And I volunteered to help with the shipping of the kits, because I've done it once. It's a lot easier than somebody trying to do that from scratch. So, and once it's done, it's done. So that's not a real big problem. But mostly I'm looking forward to doing some more applications of physics to cardiology.
That's great. Emily, I think for you, it's a research term. I think you double up your teaching and you've earned a research term. What do you have planned?
So I think just digging back into my projects, some of which have been a little on the wayside because I've been really trying to make the online semester go really well. So I'm going to be finishing some projects, but what's really fun is a number of my students from my class last semester have already emailed me to see what research they can maybe help with. So hopefully I'll be able to bring them some on some projects, because in the past I've had some undergrad students help me with some work that they're able to do at that level. And so then the other thing is hopefully I do a lot of work with European data. So it's been a long time since I've been able to be back. So my co-authors have carried a lot of the burden of the data analysis. So hopefully at some point travel will be okay. I think it might be a little bit more distance, but we're also holding a big conference on the economics of crime, which was supposed to take place last summer in Helsinki, but will hopefully take place sometime this year. So we'll have some big keynotes coming out and do a lot of cool economics papers looking at different things related to crime.
Fantastic. So I've just got two more questions for you. Do you have any advice, just even one piece of advice for students about navigating the current challenges? Because, it feels like it's the entire world for many students right now. Any thoughts, just a piece of wisdom for them?
This semester was a challenge for all of us. But if you look at anyone, or, I like to read a nonfiction biography sometimes. And if you look at anyone who has been successful, they had multiple struggles and hardships. And that's, whole chapters of your biography are written about how you overcame that struggle. So maybe think about might be your struggle. But I think, you don't become successful if you don't learn how to fail. And I failed many times in my career, and I'm sure I'll fail many more times. And, it's easy to do well when things are easy and when you're being successful. It's what makes you really push forward is when you encounter failure and you learn how to get beyond that. And so I would say, don't give up on yourself. There's going to be hard bits coming up too. We're not out of the pandemic yet. There's still going to be hard bits, and there's going to be hard bits even without the pandemic. So just don't give up on yourself. Keep pushing. And that's where sometimes the magic happens. Not always. Sometimes it's just a struggle and you have to get through it. But sometimes that's also where magic happens.
Jack?
Boy, I couldn't improve on that at all. That was perfect. It was great. The only thing I would say is that people should try and do what they like to do, if possible. And if they have a choice of taking path A or path B, even if their parents want them to go path B, but they really want to do path A, I would say go for A. And both paths may be harder because of this COVID stuff. But I think Emily's absolutely right. There are going to be times that are just going to be tough, and you just get through them.
Well, I'm going to close with my favorite question in an interview. But before I do it, I just want to say thank you. You have been amazing. I want to take both of your classes. Can somebody sit in the chat room or somehow and watch it? It'd be fantastic. But, I'd love to ask people, what brings you joy? So maybe I'll start with Emily. What brings you joy?
I guess two things. I love my research. So that actually genuinely does bring me joy. And back to what Jack said, doing what you love makes a really big difference. So, these are tough questions I'm trying to answer, but I love the process of trying to answer them. And so it's a lot more fun when your job is fun than when your job is not. And then the second thing, which is a little less academic, but just getting outside. I mean, we have a beautiful world out there, and anytime I can be outside hiking, or I signed up for the LA Marathon, we'll see when that happens. So I've been trying to get those miles in, but just, being outside. And sometimes it's good to just unplug, get outside, and then get refreshed for your next day.
Jack?
What brings me joy? I would say getting things to work. It doesn't have to be something exceptional that you get to work. I fixed a string of Christmas lights on the roof yesterday, and it's very satisfying when those lights turn on. But even just building stuff, either it's a computer program or a piece of scientific apparatus, and getting it to work, getting nature to cooperate with you is extremely satisfying. You feel like you've made a good friend with nature when she's on your side. So I won't talk about it here, it's too lengthy, but some of the experiments that I've done that were the most interesting were ones where I was able to learn what nature wanted and do it and get these fantastic results from it. So for me, it's this feeling of just being in tune with even if it's just a computer program, it's hard to explain. I'm sort of rambling here, I'm sorry, but you're part of something bigger when that happens. You really are. And that's a nice feeling. Sorry, it was such an incoherent answer, Carol.
No, I loved it. And I have to tell you, one of the things that gives me great joy is listening to the two of you talk about the things that you do. There's nothing more exciting than the infectious enthusiasm of people who really care about what they do and try to get things done and do it with such passion and importance. So I just want to say thank you. This has just been terrific, and good luck in the upcoming weeks and months. And I'm pretty sure we're going to see you back on campus sooner than we might be thinking. So
well, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.